quite a while.
Hello and welcome. I'm Ellie Richardson and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Former Labour Cabinet Minister Peter Mandelson has been released on police bail following questioning over alleged misconduct in public office. Scotland Yard opened an inquiry into the ex-business secretary after material surfaced indicating he may have passed classified Whitehall intelligence to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. US President Donald Trump threatened nations with punishing tariff hikes if they play games after his trade policy setback before the Supreme Court. President Donald Trump has denied reports that the top US military officer has flagged the risks of a major operation against Iran, saying Washington would easily defeat Iran in any conflict. Ukraine is marking the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion with a show of solidarity from its staunchest allies and no immediate end in sight to Europe's biggest war since World War II. The United States is holding meetings in Geneva with Russia and Chinese delegations about nuclear weapons after the final treaty restricting Washington and Moscow's nuclear deployment expired. Mexico has deployed 10,000 troops to quell clashes sparked by the killing of the country's most wanted drug lord that claimed dozens of lives. News of his death triggered spasms of violence, with cartel members blocking roads in 20 states and torching vehicles and businesses. South Korea's former president Yoon Suk-yeol has filed an appeal against an insurrection conviction stemming from his 2024 martial law declaration. A landmark social media addiction trial resumed with a YouTube executive insisting that the Google-owned company's aim was not to give people value, not hook them on harmful binge viewing. And now for your top story this hour. European leaders, including Finnish President Alexander Stubb and Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson, have arrived in Ukraine to mark the 4-year anniversary of Russia-Ukraine war. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiga welcomed them, highlighting the solidarity of the Nordic-Baltic 8 in supporting Ukraine's fight for freedom and justice. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has also arrived in Kyiv, where she is greeted by Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiga with a bouquet of yellow and blue flowers. Her visit underscores the EU's continued commitment to Ukraine amid ongoing conflict with Russia. To the top. Minister Ulf Kristersson has arrived in Ukraine to mark the 4-year anniversary of Russia-Ukraine war. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiga welcomed them, highlighting the solidarity of the Nordic-Baltic 8 in supporting Ukraine's fight for freedom and justice. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen also arrived in Kyiv, where she was greeted by Ukraine's foreign minister with a bouquet of yellow and blue flowers. We're now being joined by Saul Sadka, who's a political commentator joining us from Tel Aviv. Thank you, Saul, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Thank you. How can EU's visits and declarations of solidarity be translated into concrete political, military and economic support, especially amid stalled sanctions and aid debates within the bloc?
Well, the Europeans over the past 4 years of Putin's 3-day war, entering now its 5th year, have completely failed to live up to what they were supposed to do for standing by Ukraine. They have tried their best. However, the problem is that they've been put in such a situation by their previous leaders, such as Angela Merkel in particular, that it made it very difficult for them really to sanction Russia in the way that they needed to, in a way that would cause them pain points. Because of that, the war has dragged on a lot longer than it needed to. So for their visits into Kyiv are a symbolic gesture, which is nowhere near as good as it would have been to do actually more material aspects to the sanctions. But hopefully this will be a turning point. Who knows? Certainly the Russians are currently on the back foot, if not technically on the battlefield. Their economy is grinding itself into the dust and will eventually grind to a halt, whereas Ukraine, on the other hand, is receiving essentially an infinite supply of Western aid to keep it afloat. The Russians do not have that, and there's no one to back up Russia. And so when Russia runs out of money, that's the end.
And how might this anniversary visit influence the ongoing peace negotiations, including expectation for future talks and security guarantees?
Well, the ongoing talks seem to have ground to a halt. It's been going on for really since the beginning, but since Trump came in more than a year ago at this point, they've been at full force. You have people like Witkoff making efforts in that regard. And so far, they have yielded nothing. And the reason they've yielded nothing is because, while, as we mentioned, Russia is destroying its economy and turning it into a few cornfields in Ukraine, the Ukrainians are in no such position. So the Russians are destroying their economy, but as soon as they stop the war, then the gas that they've been pumping into their economy by turning their economy into a fully war economy evaporates, and at that point it will crash. So Putin can't stop the war because that will be the end of him. But in the long run, he can't continue the war because he will simply run out of resources.
And with the war, obviously, on their 4th year for the anniversary, what long-term reconstruction and recovery challenges are Ukraine facing, and what role should Europe play in addressing them? As we know, Russia are targeting energy infrastructure and railways quite often, and it's looking like, even though the EU are giving them a lot of aid with lots of money, Russia seem to constantly try and go after how their humanitarian aid is needed more than military aid, I feel like, at the minute. What do you think?
Yes, well, the situation currently is that Ukraine is digging in. They're digging vast networks of trenches and rebutments to make it very difficult for the Russians to advance very much farther than they already have. And for the world's second greatest military, as people were describing them 4 years ago, the fact that they really managed to barely move 100 kilometers from their own borders is absolutely embarrassing. And my guess is that even though the aid for Ukraine is insufficient and should be higher, it is sufficient to allow them to continue hanging on, to continue holding the line, more or less, while Russia trades vast numbers of their own young men and military stockpiles for small tracts of territory with minimal value. As they continue to do that, the war will grind to a halt, and at some point, it is likely to reverse. And it will continue to go very, very slowly until suddenly, at some point, the Ukrainians find some kind of chink that they can take advantage of and will move forward, or simply, as we've already seen, a mutiny in the Russian ranks. Their top general, if you recall, about 2 years ago, turned his tanks and men around and headed north to Moscow. And that was only stopped by some kind of last-minute deal. And then he was assassinated a few months after that. So the situation there is very uncertain, but Russia is certainly a lot weaker than some of the people who will come on your program will tell you they are. They have a veneer of strength, but their weapons are insufficient. They're incapable of matching up to Western weapons. And right now, the war has shifted into a kind of unusual trench war, but one that is bolstered by drones in every direction. So both sides are using every day tens of thousands of drones. If the reports are true, and there is evidence that they are, the Russians are losing more than 30,000 men every day to death and tens of thousands more to injury. The Russians will soon enough have to end this war. But as we said, if they do end the war, their economy collapses. And they have lost so much. Russia will never be the same after this war. Even if Russia managed to capture the 4 regions that they have demanded from the Ukrainians, if they manage to do that, and there's no prospect of that happening soon, the result would be for them complete economic catastrophe, complete isolation from the rest of the world. They have lost 1 million men to death and serious injury, and they have lost millions more young people who have left Russia. Their best and brightest have left Russia and now live in Dubai, and they live in Morocco. Some of them have moved to Egypt and Turkey. Some are living in Europe, and some have moved to the United States. Those people will never return. That will be ultimately the biggest price they will pay, that those million plus young people, their best and brightest, are lost to them. And as we go into the next generation or two, where the world is constantly going to be under pressure for young, capable talent, as population shrinks in Western countries, including Russia, but Russia's population has been shrinking for decades already. Those people are gold for an economy, and they have lost those things. And all they have to show for this is a couple of 1,000 square kilometers of farmland, now riddled with mines and weaponry in Western Ukraine. And to get that, they have traded actually trillions of potential value from their economy.
Thank you so much, Saul, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Thank you. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has stated that Russian President Vladimir Putin failed to achieve his objectives following Russia's invasion of Ukraine 4 years ago. Marking the war's 4th anniversary, Zelensky declared that Ukraine remains resilient and committed to achieving lasting peace. Furthermore, in an interview, Zelensky urged former US President Donald Trump to visit Ukraine in order to truly understand the situation. Zelensky emphasized that Ukraine's sovereignty could not be compromised and warned that giving in to Putin's demands would result in disastrous consequences. As the conflict enters its 5th year, key challenges remain, including securing guarantees from Ukraine's allies regarding future security and peace efforts. Let's listen in.
Не досягнув своїх цілей, не зламав українців, не переміг в цій війні. Ми зберегли Україну, і ми зробимо все, щоб здобути мир і щоб була справедливість. До весни менше тижня ми долаємо найважчу зиму в історії. Це факт. І це дуже непросто. Непросто всім вам. Але так само, як у перший день війни, ми продовжуємо будувати своє завтра. Крок за кроком, справа за справою, здобуток за здобутком.
China has imposed export restrictions on 40 Japanese companies, citing national security concerns as tensions between the two countries escalate. The measures target dual-use items that can have civilian and military applications, affecting companies including Mitsubishi and subsidies, Subaru and Japan Space Agency. According to reports, the restrictions aim to curb Japan's remilitarization. Reports claim that Japan has lodged a protest and says it will respond appropriately. The dispute reportedly follows Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi comments on Taiwan and has contributed to a sharp drop in Chinese tourism to Japan. We are now being joined by Collins Chong-Yu-Keat, who's a foreign affairs, security and strategy analyst. Thank you for joining us here today on NewsX World. How do China's new export controls on dual-use goods to Japanese firms reflect Beijing's strategic concerns about Tokyo's military posture? And what does this mean for regional security dynamics in East Asia?
Well, Ali, this is expected. We have seen how this pressure is being escalated by Beijing, and this focus on dual-use items, also on the export controls on these Japanese entities. They're all meant to be, to be legally framed as as part of this compliance security framework, while functioning politically as also a tool of punishment to Japan. This is clearly a targeted coercion against Japan's new move now under Takaichi, and also the strategic focus on this platform of Japanese strategic industrial backbone in terms of shipbuilding, in terms of high-end manufacturing, defense supply chains. So this signals that China is moving from rhetoric to a more structured economic statecraft and tool being used. And of course, this is as part of these response measures and tools being used by China as part of this economic retaliation, punishing Tokyo's strategic drift and changes in terms of its security architecture, and of course in terms of how the Takaichi administration is also dealing with Taiwan. So and the message is clear that from China to Japan, and of course to the wider region as well, that Japan cannot expand deterrence measures or to have a new security policy without paying these costs in terms of economic costs, in terms of economic impact, as well as in terms of these industrial costs now with this new measure, especially in regards to these new components or materials that have been at the forefront of this defense capability of Japan. But this will push Tokyo further to the to have greater fallback options in terms of the wider markets in the region, not focusing on the dependence on China as a whole. Of course, also it will push Japan. It will give more pretext to Japan now to align deeper with Washington, with the other East Asian powers, especially also in upping this ante in terms of greater security measures with regards to defending Japan's interests, with regards to Taiwan, with regards to also the new audience in Southeast Asia and in other parts of the world, also in the Quad pact as well. And this will in fact even push Japan further to consolidate its own measures to protect its own economic interests, but ultimately to protect and to strengthen its own deterrent capacity with regards to its hard power platform. Ellie.
And what are the potential short and long-term impacts on global supply chains, especially in industries that depend on advanced technologies and critical materials affected by China's export curbs?
Well, yes, been happening. This is not the one-stop measure. China has turned the entire supply chain equation to one of its strongest tools that it has now to both punish actors who have not been in line with its own interests, and we have seen measures by these powers also to realign their own strategic deflection points, and we have seen also how various tools have been implemented to ensure that there's this sufficient support system in place, and also to strengthen their own ties with the West, especially with the US, when it comes to the strategic necessity for the deterrent capacity in terms of also strengthening supply chain resilience other than China, other than the global South. But I don't see this to be impactful in terms of creating this storm in the entire supply chain equation for the region. Different East Asian and Southeast Asian actors have been well aware of how China has been using this, and they have been also practicing different maneuvers in terms of this strategic hedging between both powers, and of course also in ensuring that they are not overexposed to any kind of this direct implication of how China might use this as a tool to mold or to form compliance, or this greater realignment of these powers strategic foreign policy maneuvering. And but clearly we have seen how this in fact will backfire on China, and how this will be used as a pretext for these powers, also for these actors who have been wary of these Chinese actions, to turn to this on the side of the West in terms of securing the the deterrent capacity and the trust and confidence that these powers will get from the West, especially by the US, and this will also give these backfiring implications for Beijing in the long run.
Thank you, Collins Chong-Yuki, but please don't go anywhere, as I'll be back with you very shortly. Thank you. We are coming at you with some breaking news now. A military helicopter has crashed into a fruit and vegetable market in central Iran, killing at least 4 people, including the pilot and co-pilot. The incident occurred in Khomeinishahr near Isfahan when the helicopter, which was on a training mission, went down in a busy marketplace. 2 market stall workers also lost their lives in the crash. The crash caused a fire that was later extinguished by emergency responders. Authorities are investigating the cause, but a technical malfunction is believed to have been a factor. This is the 2nd aviation accident in Iran within a week. We are now being joined by Collins Chong-Yuki again. Thank you for joining us back here for this breaking news. As we've just heard, it's not the first time this has happened this week. What can you explain about this situation with Iran right now and their position?
Well, certainly it's being increasingly being cornered. We've also seen different arguments in place as to how and why Iran is still not, moving from its own hardline stance, and even with this, power projection, strength projection by the Trump administration in terms of the sheer hard power capacity now in full force in the Middle East, and still he has not budged, the Iranian stance, and we have seen how also. President Trump has always, emphasized on the need to secure a deal before any use of force is being considered. But we are now entering a very critical week as to, to see the kind of responses from the Iranian regime as to how it will have to eventually make a deal with the US, or to face, the fate that he has now long being shielded from. So the tensions are there, of course, but still we still have this small window of diplomatic opening that can still be salvaged by both sides. But this is definitely the kind of this tensions, or the critical tipping points that both sides will want to avoid. But it remains to be seen as to how the structure, the depth, the volume, and the extent of what actions that might be taken, especially by President Trump, in terms of giving this narrative and this message not only to Iran but to wider world that eventually will come to a point that the needs and the patience of the Trump administration will run thin, and eventually the use of force will be executed. But as of now, it still remains to be seen. But I still foresee there's still a silver lining, and there's still some semblance of hope in the next couple of days. And of course, these incidents certainly add to the the wariness on both sides. But I've yet to see any indications of President Trump, to finally use that tool, regards to also with this State of the Union address coming up, and of course, he will want also to bolster his image of being a man of peace, and that a deal can still be made with the right approach and the right, initiative also being shown by Iran in this aspect.
Thank you, Collins Chong-Yuki, but please don't go anywhere, as we'll be back with you very shortly. US President Donald Trump is set to deliver his State of the Union address today, marking a crucial moment for his presidency, with approval ratings slumping and tensions rising, particularly over Iran and domestic issues. As he faces political headwinds both at home and abroad, Trump will use the address to rally support for his administration's achievements, including his economic policies and tough border stance. However, a Supreme Court decision on his global tariffs and a growing economic slowdown threaten to overshadow his speech. With midterm elections on the horizon, Trump is expected to highlight his foreign policy, especially on Iran, and his efforts to ease the cost of living. We are now being rejoined by Collins Chong-Yuki. Thank you for joining us back here today.
Thank you.
With parts of his own party pressuring him to emphasize economic concerns, how effective can Trump be in balancing domestic priorities with broader foreign policy narratives during the address?
Well, Trump has always been on the side of the American people. We have seen how his policies, his efforts for the past year, and have given positive results, not only to the American people, but of course to the country as well. But repeatedly they have been failed by the resistance being felt domestically as well as from abroad. The latest being the decision by the Supreme Court on the tariff system. But the State of the Union is about one central idea where for President Trump, America will still need and will have to remain the central and decisive power in the world, where economic strength, military strength, and political will must reinforce one another. And this is the foundation of Trump's strategy. But we have seen how these bold approaches, these bold models being used, eventually we'll see the inevitable resistance being shown, where when a president tries to change the central idea that the globalist system has failed, and that there's this compelling need now to undo the damage of the past, and hence this is the expected cause that will need to be dealt with. But Trump's vision is not about isolation; it's about a world that is stable and peaceful, based on the mantra of peace through strength, and the need for nations to play their role in this equation, where they are not ripping off the US, and they are also being made to be responsible in terms of securing their own security needs and defenses. And of course also when they rely on the US, whether it's on the US market, whether it's on US technology, whether it's on US security umbrella, there's a cost to be paid, and that cost will now need to be paid by all these nations in terms of readjusting the failed models of the past, and in terms of also ensuring that they play their part. They are also responsible for their own support system, and of course, and this is exactly and precisely what President Trump has stood up for. But structural reform is never smooth, but stagnation is even more dangerous. And President Trump sees that whether it's from the billions of dollars of returns from the tariff system that's now being passed over to the American people, whether it's from the the rejuvenation of the U.S. military order in terms of the Golden Fleet, in terms of battle force, and of course solving and deterring more than 8 conflicts throughout the world. So these are all the major achievements being made, but they are not really being translated into the needed impact being felt by the people, and hence we have seen how this resistance is in place. But I foresee for this State of the Union, President Trump will continue to double down on his mantra, and which has not been really being appreciated domestically, of course, but also from the world over. But this is also the strategic inflection point for the U.S., where especially for President Trump to set the tone for the next 2 years, and I foresee that he will continue to maintain his momentum now, despite all the disruptions, despite all the domestic moves being made against him. I don't see this as a major stumbling block, and in fact, this State of the Union address will be made to reinforce his his approaches, and will continue. And I project that he will continue to double down on his on his model, and to set the tone for the next decade. In fact, with all his policies for the U.S. and for the world.
Thank you so much, Colin Strong-Ukip, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Thank you. Russia is investigating Telegram founder Pavel Durov as part of a criminal case on alleged assistance to terrorist activities, according to state-run media citing the FSB. Telegram, which claims over 1 billion active users globally, has denied all allegations, including accusations that it is a haven for criminal activity or compromised by Western and Ukrainian intelligence. Russia's communications regulator has restricted the app, saying Durov failed to remove extremist content. Authorities are prompting the state-backed app Max to replace Telegram for Russian users, although the platform remains highly popular for public and private communications across the country. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.